I want to go over a few of the elements of the art and art history unit and kind of give you an idea of where we're going to go over the next few weeks. The first thing to understand is that we're going to use the writing of Giorgio Vasari as the foundation to go through this unit. And that's him right there hanging out. And you can find his book. It's online. You do not need to purchase it. I've got it posted right here at the bottom of the Art and Art History page. And it opens up into this. And it's a very good edition. You do not need to read the entire text, or not even close. But you want to use this as the foundation to start exploring this unit. Because what we're going to be doing with this is using really what we've learned all along, and I'm going to allow you to use those skills to explore this unit however you see fit. You're going to get to do that. And now, one of the few things we're going to be doing with this is we're going to be looking through medieval and Renaissance artists that Vasari writes about. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be going through medieval and Renaissance artists from the book. And let me show you again. You're going to use his book, which again is entirely free, and it's posted on the site, to find whom you want to write on and whom you want to explore. And he gives portraits of dozens of artists from the late medieval and into the Renaissance, of the artists of his time and that came before him. And you'll see them listed here, starting, with, the, with the part 1. And that would be what he called the Bronze Age. Cimabue, Giotto, and Martini, and Duccio. Those are the early artists, and I'll touch on those in a moment. And then he starts getting into what he would call the Silver Age with Ghiberti and Donatello. That is Donatello, not the Mutant Ninja Turtle. And then he gets into some artists that you've heard of, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo and Titian. And that's what he's going to be calling the Golden Age. Okay, so you can use his book to look at artists and figure out whom you might want to work with. And I need to be clear in that you can work with anybody you really want to for the unit and explore however you want to. But also, as you remember from the Showa unit, he would be a primary source because he knew many of the people involved in his portraits or in his artwork, in his lives. He knew them. These were his acquaintances, the people he worked with. So he is a primary source. So there's going to be issues with his portraits, as there always are issues with primary sources. And I want you to use his initial portrait of these people, and I mean portrait as in a written portrait, not a painted portrait. What you're seeing right here is Vasari painted. You're going to use Vasari's written portrait of these people as your kind of jump-off point to explore their art, to explore the aesthetics of their art, of this person or that person's art. And Vasari is really a seminal figure because he comes from Florence, and he's in the later part of the Renaissance, and he invented the term Rinascita. That's Renaissance. That would become the Renaissance. He really created the notion that there was a Renaissance in art and a Renaissance in history, that there was a rediscovery of what the classics, the Romans and Greeks had done in artwork. That rebirth took place, he saw as taking place around him. And so he placed the medieval period, and the medieval period didn't exist as a time period until he named it and described it and gave it characteristics. So he put that narrative together that we use today, that idea that there was a Middle Age and that there was a Renaissance. And he saw himself as the Renaissance, as being part of it. And the other artists around him. And the other thing about this is he knew, either personally knew people such as Michelangelo and others, or he knew of them. So he knew most of the people he's writing about, especially in what would be called the Golden Age. Those are the later artists that you'll see in the book. So the lives of the artists, and this is extraordinarily important, began to matter. Before Vasari, nobody ever asked, who painted that? What were they trying to do? How were they putting this together? Who were the patrons and things like that? Nobody ever asked this. Vasari really began that exploration of people. He really is the founder of art history, the exploring the personalities and the context of the art that's created. And really what we're going to get into is the idea of aesthetics. In other words, these are the principles that guide the production and the interpretation of art. And that's what this unit is going to be about. But we're going to use Vasari as our jump-off point to explore the medieval and Renaissance period and the artists he first portrayed. Okay? So art really, it's important to understand that the whole notion of art, it was really a propaganda piece. In other words, to promote a certain idea, and to promote a certain perspective and promote certain individuals. And that was replaced in Vasari with the idea that artists were geniuses, were contemplating things that were extraordinarily important and universal. Art really didn't exist as what we today consider it to be, which is art and something valuable in and of itself. That didn't really exist until Vasari came along and really portrayed artists as doing something truly valuable in and of itself. Up until that time, it really was, in a sense, a way to promote somebody or to promote an idea and to teach people certain ideas. So what you're going to see in his book, and I'll let you explore, and you should take a while to explore it. You're going to see it's divided up into 3 basic sections. And let's go back to it here for a moment. You're going to see he has part 1, part 2, and part 3. Really what you're going to see is that there is a distinction between the part 1 with Giotto or Cimabue, I pronounce these terribly, Giotto and Martini and Duccio. You can tell I'm certainly not Italian. You're going to see certain styles, and he portrayed them and wrote about them in certain manners, and he saw certain values in their artwork, and he really dubbed this the Bronze Age. In other words, an early period where things were kind of rough. I'm going to ask you to not see them as being, almost childlike, but seeing and finding in them an aesthetic that's more sophisticated, and you will. So in other words, don't take Vasari as the final word on these artists. He's a primary source. I'm going to ask you to explore more and find more on what they were doing. So don't trust Vasari as the final source, as the final arbiter of who are, the characteristics of these artists and the value of them. But he described this group as being essentially the Bronze Age, the beginning of what would follow it, which is this group in part 2, which is the Silver Age, with Ghiberti, in other words, and Donatello. And you're going to see there is, in many regards, an advancement in the Silver Age over the Bronze Age. And you're going to see that, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then the age that he was a part of is this one. The one that, again, the names that you do know of, which is Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo and Titian. These were his contemporaries. These were people he either knew personally or had met or he knew about. He saw the artwork of this age and this age leading up to his own age. That's how he saw it. You don't necessarily need to agree, and I would be very careful about that, because you're going to find, if you take some of these earlier artists, you're going to find an enormous amount of sophistication in their work if you take some time with it. So I want to come back to that. So Vasari is your primary source for jumping into the medieval and the Renaissance art period, but do not take his word as the final word on any of these artists. He's a primary source. He's going to have issues, he's going to have biases, and he's going to have other things. And there's going to be distortions and there's going to be insights, but he's a primary source. He's a good jumping off point. Okay? And so let me give you a little bit of a familiarity with these periods. This is, you can see a little bit of kind of what he's talking about. You can see this is Cimabue. That's the Last Supper. Now, many of you may be familiar with Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. That was an icon that was painted over and over and over again. And this is Cimabue's Last Supper. And you can tell it's really different. And this came long before Da Vinci. And it's obviously a scene taken from the Bible where Jesus is eating with his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion. And you can see this is, in my sense, kind of a troubling Last Supper. And you're going to see the disciples here, they're all kind of involved in their own little world, and the coloring is kind of upsetting, and it's kind of, there's no real unity to it. But then if you see Giotto, you're going to see, and he's got a painting over here, but you can see the stylized, and you'll often hear art historians talk about it being stylized. These don't seem as lifelike. But what I'm going to urge you to do, and I'll do this as we go through the unit and examine various paintings, I'm going to urge you to not see them as rudimentary or unsophisticated, but understand this is part of the style. That it doesn't seem as lifelike as you would get in the later in the Renaissance, but you want to pay attention to what I'm going to be calling their aesthetics. What are they trying to accomplish with it? Are they trying to accomplish a unity? And which seems here to be the case. And notice I use the word seems. It seems he's trying to create some kind of unity here and some kind of harmony here. It seems to me that Cimabue is trying to create, and again, please understand I'm mispronouncing the names. I believe he's trying to create some kind of disruption. Notice again, this is not, symmetrical. This is placed at an odd angle. And the faces are all pointing in different directions. And Jesus here is somehow in the middle of it all while there's so much disruption around him. And the colors are even disruptive, okay? They're a little bit shocking. They stand out. Part of that is that these were often displayed in churches. And it's important to know that they didn't have electric lighting. So these colors stood out, even in not so good light. But you've got paintings like this. Okay, so the color seems to be designed to disrupt the viewer. It seems to be, to me. That seems to be guiding him, and it has that effect, I believe, on the viewer. But notice what starts to happen in the Silver Age. And these are statues of Ghiberti and Donatello. This is Ghiberti's, I believe this is Ghiberti's doors. What you had were a number of artists working in different art forms. You had, and all of these figures are portrayed in, here's Donatello, and here's Ghiberti. They're portrayed here, and you're going to see that they seem more lifelike. And they're not entirely concerned with biblical themes. That's David. And I know many of you have seen Michelangelo's David, which, we can get to in a little bit. But this was an earlier David that was put together by Donatello. It was Donatello. And again, notice that this is a radically different David than you would see later on. This was a precursor to what Michelangelo would do. But you also see this. This is, and again, I believe it's Donatello, doing a statue of one of the patrons who had just passed away. And you might think, well, yeah, that's a statue. Statues weren't done like this. These were usually done as part of a funeral or as part of a memorial to the person who died, and were part of the tomb where the person was buried. This was put on public display, not part of the tomb, but just as a public display in order to remember. Notice that the art is being used to create a narrative about this individual. And I believe his name, I don't quite remember his name, but he was, that's his family. So it was kind of a dawn of realism. And here's Ghiberti's doors. He's doing reliefs, and he's creating narratives that he wants people to understand. And please understand, he's not doing this because he just thought this up. He was commissioned by somebody to make these doors. And this gentleman, Donatello, was commissioned by the family to make this gentleman on a horse because he was such a fabulous artist. And this Donatello was commissioned to make a David. He decided to respond to the commission with a certain approach to the stories that we know about David in the Bible. So notice that this is both a representation, but an interpretation of the biblical theme for a purpose, okay, to promote a purpose that is basically spelled out by the patron. But the patron doesn't control it. The artist makes the artwork. The patron supports it, but the artist is reinterpreting some of the biblical themes or some of the political realities that were going on around him, and creating a history with the art. So understand that what you will get with Vasari's lives, or something about, here's Ghiberti right here, and here's Donatello. You'll get a sense of what they were trying to do, but you won't get the whole picture. You won't get everything. And let's take a look at the later Renaissance. And here's some of the things that you may have seen. This is this is Titian's painting, and this is actually a Greek myth portrayed by Titian, and you'll see that more and more often as you move through the Middle Ages to the Renaissance and into the Golden Age of the Renaissance. You'll see more and more themes coming into it that were borrowed from the Greek and Roman mythology. And this is not biblical in any sense. Okay, that was Titian working with the mythology that he had picked up on in being commissioned to paint this. But also you're going to see The Last Supper, Da Vinci, and most people have seen it. And notice the stylized approach to it, the unity. Even though there is some disruption around it, there seems to be some balance or harmony going on here in Da Vinci. And there's some troubling aspects within this painting with the arguments going on and the disruption, but there is also simultaneously a balance. And this you may have seen is the Pietà. This is one of Michelangelo's earlier works, and that's Mary with Jesus taken down from the cross. And that has a harmony to it, but it's also disruptive. And so you'll always see them working in one sense or another with either a biblical theme or with a classical theme or a classical mythology, and portraying something with an ideology behind it. And you'll pick up on that from your research into the piece that you've decided you want to work with. And what I'll be walking you through in this unit is something called aesthetics. And these are principles that guide both the creation and the interpretation of art. These are the principles that guide both the creation and the interpretation of art. How is the artist working, and what is he or she trying to do? But also, how are you responding to it as a viewer? Understanding aesthetics means you're understanding the artwork at a deeper level. And the two primary aesthetics that take place in art history and art throughout are sublime and beauty. Some things are beautiful and undeniably so, and they strike the viewer, and they were probably part of the artist's aesthetic when he or she created it. There is going to be some kind of multeity of unity. In other words, multeity of unity is a phrase that describes the beautiful. And it was, brought up in the Romantic period to describe art and poetry that had multiple things going on at the same time, but they seem to be working together in a harmony. With the sublime, there's going to be some kind of frustration to the understanding of the viewer. It may or may not have been part of the original aesthetic that guided the artist as he or she was creating the art. But you can pick up on it if you recall artwork by people such as, Picasso and others. He's obviously not putting together paintings that are supposed to be pleasant, that are nice. That's artwork that's supposed to disrupt. So that seems to be a pretty clear case of somebody working with a sublime aesthetic. It's disruptive. That's what the sublime does. You might see that if you look through some of these pieces. I believe, and please understand, I put I on this, I believe this is more of a sublime aesthetic. Okay? I believe that this one is more of a beautiful aesthetic. It's supposed to be some kind of harmony. And I believe this one, it could go either way. I see elements of beauty but I see discord and disruption in this one. You're going to find, as you go through this unit, elements of both the beautiful and the sublime at work in these artworks, okay? So for now, what you should be doing is going through the discussions that we have in Unit 4. So you have these. What I've done with the discussions, and I'll take you to the I misspelled his name there, Cimabue. I got to go back and rework that. This is the first artwork we're going to be working with, but please understand, you can interpret this in a different manner. But what I want you to do is describe, first and foremost, describe what's going on in the artwork. Notice the colors. Notice the shapes. Notice the individuals who are involved in this. And I want to give a heads up at first. Do not worry if you're not very familiar with the biblical accounts. Okay? Some of you will be, some of you won't be. And that's entirely legitimate. Either way, it doesn't matter. Go through and describe what you see as going on here. It's called formalism. We're going to be going through the shape of the artwork. And you don't have to have necessarily a grounding in one field or another. So, but be careful. If you do have an understanding of the biblical themes, be careful that your understanding doesn't take over what you see Cimabue doing with this. He's making an interpretation. Try to understand what he's doing with it. Okay? And again, when I go through this, I see that the shape is kind of off kilter, and all the all the disciples are all facing different directions, and here's Jesus as calm in the middle. I don't see this as being as having that multeity of unity that I talked about before. I see more of a disruption. But notice first and foremost, I have to describe and go through. Notice that Cimabue gives all of them halos because they're all in one form or another saints. So there's a number of things going on in this. So first and foremost, what I'm going to want you to do in the discussion, when you go through the discussion on this, is go through and describe what's going on. So put aside your aesthetic judgment for a bit and describe what's going on. Then come to your aesthetic judgment, whether or not you see this as beautiful. And if you do, that is perfectly legitimate. Or if you see it as sublime. And so I'm just telling you I see it as sublime, but you don't need to listen to me. You could see it as sublime too, but in a different aspect. So make your own assessment. You could see this as beautiful, but find the unity that's going on in this. Okay? All right, I'll stop there. Go ahead and jump in and start doing the discussions as you can over the next week or so. And I'll be introducing the research unit in the coming week. We'll be going through that, and let's try to get this last unit done, and you'll all do well. All right? Take care, you guys.